There's heroes and there's legends. Heroes get remembered, but legends never die.
It's the Sitting Sportside podcast, exclusively on 1045theteam.com.
Oh, no! Because there's no crying in baseball. There's no crying in baseball! No crying!
It's the Sittin Sportside podcast here on 1045theteam.com. Whew! I am ready to get into this fantasy baseball season and the regular baseball season. The reason why I bring up fantasy baseball is because if you haven't checked out my fantasy baseball podcast, giving you value picks for all positions, including starting pitcher, relief pitcher, catcher, all the good ones, outfield for sure. You can find that on the youtube.com/team1045 page, and the special, if you go to the our 1045 The Team YouTube page that I just plugged right there, there is a special now. This is all brand new, a special playlist now for Sittin Sportside podcast, and the top podcast from now on will always be the most recent podcast, and that is, as right now, the fantasy baseball one. But if you're listening to this one, it will be this preview of what is the American League Central. The reason why I'm doing the American League Central first for my division previews is for one reason and one reason alone, and that's because I don't think the remaining two relevant people to sign, which I consider Greg Holland and Alex Cobb, are going to sign with any of these two teams. Now, watch me, I'll eat my words. Greg Holland or one of the two will, make a surprise decision and sign with. And I think the only team that might sign one of those two is Minnesota, unless one gets one on the cheap deal and it looks to trade them mid-season, which could work for a couple of these teams, like the White Sox, Royals, and Tigers, which I'm not going to bury the lead here. They are going to be my bottom three teams in some order, and I'm going to get right to it right now. So not much suspense for where they're going to who's the top and who's the bottom. I think coming into this podcast, you guys all knew that anyway. So let's get right into it for my fifth place team. And I just want to set a precedent here, or just to let you guys know about my final predictions. You'll have the division winners from all three divisions on each side. That will be a fact, but you're not going to get my wild card, two teams from each league, and maybe some MVP and other award predictions until that final podcast. So whichever one it is, whichever division it is, it might be a little bit longer with my final predictions in the end. I'm not going to say today if my second place team in this division is a wild card team. That will be the last podcast. Hopefully you guys listen to that one as well. I need a little more time to think about it. I need to go through all these teams in my mind and in this podcast before I finally put the pen to paper and permanent ink it in to who my final wild card teams are. But you will get one playoff team today, and that will be the first place team in this this American League Central. So who it's not going to be? My fifth place team is the Detroit Tigers. So they won't be my division champions. They won't be making the playoffs, and they might be the worst team in the American League because they were, like they were last season, I believe. So we're looking at a team that has veterans in Miguel Cabrera and Victor Martinez who aren't really looking forward to spending what could be, some of their final years and, definitely on the back end of both of their careers on a team that really isn't in a win area right now because the pitching isn't deep enough. They have veterans that they've brought in who could pitch well, I think, like a Francisco Liriano. Mike Fiers could have a rejuvenation with the opportunity in Detroit with the expectations being so low. But that being the case, I don't have enough confidence in a guy like Jordan Zimmerman to have that much of a bounce back type year. Daniel Norris or Matt Boyd, whoever gets that fifth spot, I do have some confidence in because they both pitched well in certain capacities the last year, but they've also had their struggles. So I'm not really big on this rotation. Obviously, Mike Fulmer's big. He's a real deal at the top of that rotation. So I do love Mike Fulmer, what he can bring to the table. But past that one spot, there's a lot of question marks because while Liriano, Zimmerman, Fiers, Boyd, and Norris have had really good moments in their careers, and in the last couple of seasons they've had bright spots. Very few for Jordan Zimmerman last year. They still have the opportunity this season, if they can get their pitches back on track and become more control over their pitches. They could really put things together. Mike fires that great curveball. Liriano, has been great with the slider on the lefty. So, I do have some faith that they could possibly have under 4 ERAs, but most likely the only person with a sub-4 ERA on this rotation probably would be Mike Fulmer. If I had to guess the other one, it actually would be either Boyd or Norris, who gets that 5th spot, or maybe one of the other two gets kicked out, and if Zimmerman has another a 5.5 ERA come May 28th, then maybe he gets booted from the rotation for one of the other two. Now for the hitters, like I said, I just mentioned that Miguel Cabrera, Victor Martinez still going strong with the Detroit Tigers, a team that they were able to be successful with in their past. But this year, I think that Miguel Cabrera has a bounce back year to his standards. I do think that he'll have a really good year, maybe individually statistics. Not really sure he'll be traded or not. I really don't see it happening, but you never really know. Victor Martinez, I think, is a good chance he does possibly get dealt at the deadline. But Miguel Cabrera, I think he's kind of like that Freddie Freeman type of, and while he's not young like Freddie Freeman was with that Atlanta Braves team, I still think looking at a type of, I'm not sure I see him ever getting traded. But, not ever, but getting traded this season. But let's be honest, if a team really is looking for a first base piece, a piece into a lineup, they will definitely look at Miguel Cabrera, and if they're willing to give up the price, because Detroit will probably have a hefty price, because he's still a really good player, and I think by the time that the name comes up in June and July, he will be having a very good year, so the price will be high there. The outfield they're going to try out Nick Castellanos in the outfield because of Yaimer Candelario getting the third base job, who came over from the Cubs in a trade last year. I like Candelario. I think he'll probably be a heart of the order type hitter on this team, maybe 6th at the least, because where's the top of this order? Is it going to be Jose Iglesias? Is it Dixon Machado at second base? Is it Leonis Martin in center field? There's just not enough players in my, where did, Ian Kinsler's gone. So where are you going to get the top of the lineup productivity? So that's maybe Candelario bats second. So there's not enough there, I think, at the top of the lineup. In the middle of the lineup, I think you have 4 really good hitters: Cabrera, Martinez, Candelario, and Castellanos. While maybe Iglesias can bat on a high average, but I don't have much faith in Martin or Matuk. That's why I think Jacoby Jones could get an outfield position before the season's over. He's shown pop in the past. And then last but not least, go to the bullpen. And Shane Green could be an interesting closer, but the bullpen's not that deep. Joe Jimenez is probably their highest upside and guy to look at in that bullpen, just because he's young and he's been a highly touted prospect. So look for him as a bright spot in the bullpen. So, like I said, I said that on a different podcast maybe, but I'm going to say it now. I'm going to try to say as much as positives about these teams as I can. Because there's still a lot of good players on every single team. And Detroit doesn't really have that prospect that I'm going to be talking about with maybe a couple of the other two teams that are going to be on the lower. But like I said, great top of the rotation guy, Mike Fulmer. Jimenez, look for him, and then Castellanos. Can he continue to develop into a really good player? That's what I'm kind of looking at as well. For Nick Castellanos and the Detroit Tigers this year, I think they'll have a very good opportunity to show whether they can be better than expected. But they're definitely my 5th place team. On to the 4th place team, a team that lost so much, but not their third baseman. Kansas City Royals are going to be my 4th place team. Mike Moustakas returns on a very team-friendly contract. Won't be on the team next year. I'm gonna make that definite. I'm gonna make that definite, but it's not. Obviously isn't. But I say there's a really good chance he's gone next year, as anyone else would. And the rest of this team isn't terrible in terms of the lineup. I think Jorge Soler, who was supposed to kind of, with that Wade Davis trade, break out last year for the team, and he never did. He battled injuries, and he'll probably continue to battle some injuries in his career. But I think this year he has 4 home runs in spring training, including one off of a prospect that we'll mention with the next team. And so, which is an impressive feat. So he's a really good player that could really break out this year. And he's been a disappointing player, but I think he'll break out this year. Whether he's playing left field, DHing, I don't really know, because Jorge Bonifacio just got suspended 80 games due to PEDs. He'll be mid-season. He'll probably end up getting the right field job that will be left over after John Jay. Probably doesn't necessarily hold on to it, but he might. They recently signed John Jay to fill in for the Bonifacio mishaps, and I think that John Jay, who's going to probably play center field, to move Gordon to left or Soler to right, one of the other, one of the two will play playing left or right field, the other playing the opposite. And I do think that Jay could be a decent player, but he doesn't really pop off the screen to me. Alex Gordon is continuing to bat in the low 200s, not good enough. Around that infield, Alcides Escobar really still continues to not really impress. The most impressive part of that infield, besides Moustakas, is Whit Merrifield, who had a really good season last year. So, that being said, I'm really impressed by what this team can bring in terms of better than expected. Because I think when you lose so many people like Eric Hosmer, Lorenzo Cain, Wade Davis, obviously before last season, I think there's this huge expectation that they're going to just totally, lack thereof expectation, right? That they're going to go down. I still think they're going to be competitive. I think that they probably finish with maybe 10 games below 500, which isn't a great season by any stretch of the imagination. By any means, but I do think that the Kansas City Royals will be better than maybe expected. Lucas Duda at first base, the underrated Whit Merrifield, and then the rotation: Danny Duffy, Ian Kennedy, Jason Hamill, Nate Carnes, if he can recover from his July thoracic outlet surgery, and even Jake Junis. I think there is a rotation that could do really well. Jake Junis had a great rookie year. I don't know, a good rookie year. He showed flashes that he could be a good starter. So I think that he's someone to look out for. The rotation isn't terrible. Danny Duffy's a really good left-handed pitcher, but Kennedy probably over 4. Hamill probably over 4. So it's similar to that Detroit rotation where you got a really good pitcher on top of the rotation, and from there on down, there's some pitchers that could pitch really well. And I actually have more faith in these ones than I do the Detroit Tiger pitchers. Bullpen is where I think they're the biggest difference between them and the Tigers, and why they could end up winning more games. It's a very strong bullpen because even though you lost Davis and you lost Holland the year before that, you have a really strong closer in Kelvin Herrera, Brandon Moorer, and Willie Peralta, who they brought in to be an everyday a relief pitcher, or a relief pitcher now instead of a starting pitcher, which he was in Milwaukee for a long time. I think there's a lot to like from this bullpen, and I think they can hold down games. Is why they can win close games. Is why they might be better than expected. Will they be better than my third place team, which is the Chicago White Sox? If you haven't figured it out by now, I don't know. I think the reason why I have Chicago at the 3 is for 2 reasons, and their names are Michael Kopech and Eloy Jimenez. Because look, they are 2 of the top prospects in baseball, probably top 10, both of them around there. And so Kopech probably the best pitching prospect out there. He has consistent fastball up around the 99, 100. So I think if he comes up mid-season, and if Jimenez comes up, July or August, that's when they can win some games and possibly work their way up to third place. They might not start there. The Royals might start out better. But I think because of those 2 players, the spark that they'll bring whenever they do come up, which I do think will be this year for both of them, that's what's going to be the difference. They get Carlos Rodon back, hopefully for them in July. I don't know how healthy he will be after left shoulder surgery, but I still think he'll be a good pitcher. And they also have 3 good young pitchers in Giolito, Lopez, and Fulmer, who are already in the rotation. Lucas Giolito, I think after a really good stretch last year where he had a sub 2.5 ERA or something like, around there, I think he can build off that and continue off that top build prospect that he was in Washington. And same thing with Ronaldo Lopez. I'm not sure he's going to get to that quite that well, but a 3.5 ERA with around 175 strikeouts isn't out of the question, in my opinion, for Ronaldo Lopez. And Carson Fulmer, while I do think he's best fitted for a bullpen role where he was at Vanderbilt, I do think that he could have some success in the rotation until Kopech forces him out, or even Dylan Cease, who probably isn't going to be ready until 2020. But still, he could probably be forced out of that starting rotation with how many good young players this White Sox team has, which I wouldn't be surprised if this team is a playoff team or World Series contender in 2020. So that's why this team could maybe impress sooner than expected, because you look at the lineup and you have the infield around with Abreu, Yohan Moncada, who in his first full season could really impress. Tim Anderson, I think, is an underrated shortstop that if you don't know about him, you should. But then you get to third base and you get the DH, and they're interchangeable with Tyler Saladino and Matt Davidson. I think Davidson's actually underrated. I think he's got some pop and really good power, but there's just not enough firepower from those two positions. And then you go to the outfield and Nicky Delmonico and Adam Engel out in center field. Now, I think that Engel has some upside as a leadoff guy. We probably bet more towards the bottom of the lineup if I really had to guess. And then even Nicky Delmonico has showed some pop late last season, but they're not these, names that are going to pop out at you, and they're not necessarily. I'm not even sure they're going to maybe even come close to becoming a household name, or even a name many people even know play fantasy baseball or baseball people in general. I still think they're going to be that obscure player that's having a decent year at best. So Avisel Garcia, who had a really good year last year, batted in 300s, but he still has consistently shown that he's this great player that they thought they were getting when they traded for him from the Tigers. And then they get catcher Wellington Castillo in free agency is an upgrade all over what they had in the past. So I think that that bat at the catcher position is great, but what are they going to do? How will Matt Davidson, Delmonico, Engel, and Saladino all do? That's what will be the difference for this team. Like I said, Jimenez will come in and play left field or DH. And I think his bat and potentially Kopech in the rotation will really make a difference for this team. Bullpen, I think they have a pretty good bullpen. If Soria or Nate Jones closes either one, I think they've got a good bullpen. It's not going to be too deep, but it's going to be a good enough bullpen to get the job done. Second place team, this is where it gets interesting. You have no idea where I'm going with this, or you probably do. Second place team for the second year in a row is the Minnesota Twins, which means that the first place team I do have, once again, is the potent Cleveland Indians. We'll get to them in a minute, but the Minnesota Twins continue to impress me with how much they want to win now, and what they went out and did in this offseason shows that they want to win now, and they're going to do it with a young team still. Jake Odorizzi, Lance Lynn. They traded for Odorizzi from the Tampa Bay Rays, and they bring in Lance Lynn on a one-year deal. Perfect. What you could ask for as Minnesota Twins fans. Ervin Santana probably out till maybe late May, early June. So you lose your number one starter from last year. Jose Barrios, Lance Lynn, and Jake Odorizzi and Kyle Gibson, your four-man rotation for the first month of the season, with the extra off days being thrown into there this year. I think you're fine with that as Paul Molitor, as the manager. So the rotation, I think, is a lot better, much improved, especially bringing in those two guys, Lynn and Odorizzi. The depth of it, Gibson's okay at the fifth. I'm okay with Gibson as my fifth starter once Santana comes back. I'm okay with that. If he's not good, I'm okay with Alberto Mejia as my fifth starter. So I really like where this rotation is, especially when Santana comes back, and if he's fully healthy and everybody else in the rotation is fully healthy, they have a pretty good rotation. It's not going to rival Cleveland's, because it's impossible, especially in this division, but they're going to have a pretty good rotation. And then you get to their lineup, and I don't really necessarily see a big weak spot in their lineup. We have a lot of good lineups in Major League Baseball, but this is a good lineup that could be underrated. If Byron Buxton could really put things together and hit around 280, steal over 40 bases, and have the pop to maybe hit 20 home runs, then I think you're looking at, that's a pretty high order. But he's a really good young player. He showed it last year in certain stretches. So if he can do that consistently this year, he'll become a household name. And if you continue to see home runs hit left and right by Eddie Rosario out in left field, and then Max Kepler, he continue to do some good things out in right field, I think you have a pretty darn good outfield. And some underrated players in the infield. Jorge Polanco has been really underrated just in general, because you don't really know much about him, but he hit it pretty well last year in certain aspects. He was able to drive in a lot of runs for a shortstop. And a guy you still might not know about if you're really been under a rock, Brian Dozier. I think he still doesn't get the respect that he deserves as one of the best second basemen in all of baseball. He hits over, I believe he hit over 40 home runs last year. If he wasn't 40, he was close. He's a sensational option at second base for them, and he'll continue to do a good job, whether it's in the 3-hole, the 4-hole, maybe even leads off again. So I think he'll continue to do a good job. And then they signed Logan Morrison. Another thing that they did in this, they brought in Logan Morrison, and we'll get to the bullpen moves in a second here, but Lomo had a surprisingly good season last year and was not really given much play in free agency this year. So add him to their designated hitter role with potentially Kenny Vargas, Miguel Sano, with Eduardo Escobar possibly working on that third base instead. But he can fill in at first baseman if you don't like Joe Mauer there. So there's a lot this team can do. Like I said, the depth actually isn't that bad with Robbie Grossman, Kenny Vargas as well, as I mentioned. That's a pretty good depth for this team in the lineup. So even if someone goes down, I think there's a lot that they have still if something went wrong. Zach Granite is a guy people kind of like from his speed drops, so as a backup outfielder. So they have a lot of backups in the infield. And then the bullpen, they bring in Fernando Rodney, Addison Reed, they get Zach Duke. So their bullpen has gotten a lot better. You moved Tyler Duffy full-time to the bullpen. I think it can work out very well. We've seen it in the past as a middle relief guy. So look at this team. I think this Minnesota Twins team, and they're probably the favorite right now for me to get a wild card spot. Like I said, I'll on the last podcast I do of the divisions, I will let you know whether or not I do see them as a wild card team for the second year in a row in the American League. But they have a very good prospect to do so. The problem is they won't be sneaking up on teams this year. Teams will be taking them for real going into the series. So can they win the games? That's for sure. The reason why I do think that they could possibly be a wild card team is because guess what teams they get to play? They get to play the Detroit Tigers, Kansas City Royals, and Chicago White Sox a lot this season. And that could mean if they really take those games seriously themselves, that they could get much needed wins when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, and that could have them as advantage over teams from the West and the East who could be a little bit more competitive in the American League. So that's why I think that they're the favorite right now. I'll let you know for sure on the last podcast of the division previewing season. And last but not least, we're getting toward the 25-minute mark in this podcast, so I'm going to go quickly through this Cleveland Indians team. You know about Francisco Lindor. You know about Jason Kipnis. You know about the rotation and Corey Kluber, Carlos Carrasco, Trevor Bauer, Josh Tomlin, and Danny Salazar, if you don't know by now. And Salazar may miss opening day because of right shoulder inflammation. Mike Clevenger is a really good fifth option to fill into that rotation as well. And like I said before, with this new season of being able to get a little bit more off days this year, then you might be able to even get away with a four-man rotation. We know about the bullpen too, and Cody Allen, Andrew Miller. They did lose Brian Shaw, but Dan Otero and Zach McAllister have done pretty good jobs out of the bullpens in their own right. Now let me get to some players that you might not know about. They lose Edwin Encarnacion going into last season, and well, what did they get? Or not lose Edwin Encarnacion. They got Edwin Encarnacion coming into last season. They lost Mike Napoli, and then filled him with Edwin Encarnacion. Mike Napoli is back, and he could possibly be an option if Yonder Alonso doesn't work out. So the lineup is great, and they get Edwin Encarnacion as a 3 or 4 guy. Great. Linder, Kipnis. You might not, if you still don't know about Jose Ramirez, then I'm glad you're this deep into the podcast because you need to know about how good this guy was last year. Let's talk about the options that they have in the outfield. If Brantley's not healthy, then you're looking at a Chisenhall, Zimmer, Tyler Naquin outfield. It's not ideal, but they really can get things done. They have a guy named Francisco Mejia, who is a catching prospect, but probably won't be a catcher. He probably can work. He's working his way to possibly get in the outfield. If he can come up and be a very good part of that outfield, and Bradley Zimmer can stay healthy this year, they'll be fine in the outfield department. And then Brantley with the ankle, I think, as much as he can play. And we've already know about Kipnis being able to play a little bit of the outfield, so maybe if they can move that, if they want to put Yandy Diaz's bat in the lineup at third and move Ramirez to second base. So there's really no question marks on this team. There's really nothing much else to say. Encarnacion, from his standards, probably didn't have as good of a year last year. Still had a pretty darn good year. But do I think that's going to change it? No, I think he's going to be right where he is. Perez behind the plate. We know what he can do in the playoffs. This is a surefire playoff team led by Terry Francona, and there's really nothing else to say about it. This is a really good team. They're probably going to win the division handily, if I'm being candid, and we'll probably I don't want to say probably or definitely say, but I think we're going to see a pretty good series with them in the playoffs, whether it's with the Yankees, Red Sox, or Astros. That might be giving away future podcasts, but if you want to know how I really think that the other divisions are going to turn out, You can tune into those podcasts on 1045theteam.com and youtube.com/team1045. We've set up a playlist for the Sittin Sportside podcast, so I'm really excited about that. Check that out. For any other podcasts you've missed in the past, go down a memory lane. Take a time machine with me if you want to. So once again, I'm Eric Hanman here on 1045theteam.com. Thank you for listening to the Sittin Sportside podcast. I hope that you listen to the other MLB Division podcasts and the fantasy baseball podcasts that I do have up. Thanks again. This has been the #Sittin Sportside podcast.